Hello and welcome to Crossing the 49th, the Cross-Border Tax and Financial Planning Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Hogan, and today we're going to talk about expat and cross-border tax filing deadlines. All right, hello and welcome. All right, I'm doing this podcast in the car, so my apologies if the audio is not great right now, or if the video is bouncing around, but I thought this would be a great time to kind of get into tax deadlines, expat deadlines, Canadian both, and US deadlines. Because we get a lot of questions about this. When's my tax return due? When are specific forms due? How can we extend these deadlines? So we'll work through the deadlines for this year, and I'll just speak in terms of regular date deadlines. Sometimes if deadlines fall on holidays, then they'll be moved to the next business day, or in certain cases you'll have natural disasters or events like COVID that require the government to push deadlines past our original filing deadline date. But I'll just talk in general terms what the deadlines are for each year, and then you can look up those amounts if or those dates if you happen to be on a holiday. Okay, so starting with Canadian returns, and I'm gonna, for purposes of this conversation, I'm gonna use an American living in Canada as kind of the base case model for what you might need to file. So Americans living in Canada have both Canadian and US tax filings, as we know. So starting with the Canadian return. So your Canadian return is due April 30th of each year, once again, unless it falls on a holiday. Unless you actually have self-employed income, and if you're self-employed or your spouse is self-employed, then you actually have till June 15th to file your tax returns, along with any other forms. There's some other deadline date extensions for those that have passed away in the year that we won't get into right now, but yeah, just know April 30th is your Canadian tax filing deadline. Unless you're self-employed or your spouse is self-employed, then it's June 15th. Now we all know we have certain forms in the tax return that have potential penalties if not filed on time, namely T1135 and T1142. Those forms are due at the same time as your tax return. So if you're self-employed, it'd be June 15th. If you're not, it's April 30th. And I just mentioned that because those forms carry a pretty high penalty if not filed on time, $25 a day to a maximum of 100 days, or $2,500 plus interest. So important to file those forms. So those will all be due at the same time as your tax return. One form in particular that is not due at the same time as your tax return, if it's required, it's the T1134 form. That's not a form that most people have to file. If you have ownership in a foreign affiliate, you might have to file this form, but just know if you do have to file that form, it's 12 months from the year-end date of the actual foreign affiliate. So not very common, but something to be aware of. But 12 months after the year-end, so that's often 12 months after your personal tax deadline year-end. Not the deadline, but the actual year-end. Okay, so let's move on to your US return. So US 1040 returns are technically due April 15th. However, if you're an American living outside of the US, you get an automatic extension to June 15th. So most of my clients, Americans living in Canada, have till June 15th to file their US return. If you need an extension past that date, you can file an extension form 4868, and that will further extend you to October 15th. If you're an American not living outside of the US, you do have to file that extension before April 15th to get an extension to October 15th. Now, in some circumstances, the IRS will allow you to file or receive an extension to December 15th. However, you have to write to the department and explain why you need a further extension to December 15th. So that is available, but honestly, you're going to want to file your US tax return at the latest by October 15th. But if you really get stuck and you can't get the information, you can write to the department to try to get a December 15th filing deadline extension. Okay, and then of course with the 1040 and the FBARs, or instead the 1040s, we have FBAR filings as well. So the FBAR filings, technically, this is an odd thing. They tell you that the tax filing deadline is April 30th, but they give you an automatic extension to October 15th. Therefore, it's really just October 15th, which is kind of an odd thing to have in the rules, but Yeah, April 15th, but automatic extension to October 15th. So everybody has till October 15th. But I would suggest that you simply just file the FBAR as soon as you can when it's prepared and done accurately, because the penalties on those forms are significant. Not that we see penalties necessarily being assessed on those forms, but there's no reason to even take that risk. So just make sure you file your FBARs on time. Okay, so moving on to, this has less to do with Americans living in Canada. But you might actually have non-resident US returns to file. So 1040NR filing. So if you're a Canadian tax resident living in Canada and you might have rental properties in the US and you file 1040NR non-resident income tax return, that return will be due June 15th. However, if you have wages that need to be reported on your 1040, they're actually due April 15th. And once again, you can file an extension to extend your 1040 NRs to ensure they're not late. So 4868, same form to extend the 1040s to extend the 1040 NR. Just remember, if you have wages that you have to report, which is not very common, but if you have wages to report on the 1040 NR, it will be due April 15th. So don't forget to file that on time. Some other forms of note, everybody's favorite form, the 3520 and the 3520A, to report foreign gifts or distributions from an estate or interest in a non-US estate. So the 3520 will generally be due the same time as the tax return. It would actually be automatically extended as well if you live outside the country to June 15th. So technically, or normally at the same time as the tax return, but the 3520A will actually be due 3 months after, or the 15th day of the third month after your year end, which is normally December 15th. So that would be March 15th, with a further extension available if you file Form 7004, which is really just an extension form for certain forms and returns. So if you have a 3520 or a 3520A, make sure you get on the extensions early, because once that March 15th deadline will pass quickly. And the penalties on those forms, and we do see penalties on the 3520s, unlike the FBARs, and we don't file FBARs late, but I'm talking about, you know, new clients coming in that might have late FBAR filings or have filed their FBARs late. We tend not to see penalties, but we certainly see penalties for 3520. So make sure you get your extensions in for the 3520s, because they can be honestly a huge pain to try to get the penalties reversed. Another return that is much less common than, of course, 1040s or 1040 NRs is the 1120F form. So for those that actually have business income that they earn in the US through a Canadian corporation, you might have a 1120F foreign corporate return. Once again, you know, that return is due the 15th day of the third month after year end, but you actually get 6 months if you are living out of Canada or don't have a permanent establishment in the US, with a further extension available for another 6 months with that 7004 form. Once again, I'm not going to get into the details of the extension request. Just know that if you actually have a 1120F to file, just file your extensions earlier the better, because once again, the penalties on those forms are significant. And it's not even necessarily the penalties for either late treated disclosures, but in some cases, if you file that return late, you'll be taxed on your gross income versus your net income, which could be disastrous. You know, you might have $1 million in gross income and $100,000 in net income after expenses, but if not properly filed on time, they might tax you on your gross income. So the lesson here: if you have 1120Fs to file, make sure you file your extension. So once again, that's not all the forms and filings, but those are the general ones for expats or Americans living in Canada. So the real lesson here is, if you can't file on time, make sure to file those extensions. And of course, I mean, we didn't get into this today, but there's tax payment deadlines that are tied to the filing deadlines. If you feel like you're going to be short on tax, make sure to make tax payments. Any tax payments over and above what you actually owe will get refunded, so you'll be able to save on penalties and interest on those. Okay, so that was a short one, but hopefully you guys found that helpful. if you're watching this on YouTube and you have any questions about deadlines or really anything at all, please don't hesitate to add those comments below. Make sure to subscribe and click that alert button so that you're notified when I post new videos. And once again, all my contact information is below. If you need to reach me, please do so. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.